Maria Hartford, a Mexican immigrant widow in Charleston, battles her late husband's wealthy family when they tried to take everything after his suspicious death. Armed only with his will and hidden evidence of their crimes, Maria faces intimidation, lies, and violence. But her determination exposes their corruption, winning her daughter's inheritance, justice for Richard, and the downfall of the Hartford Empire. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength when you need it most. The summer air in Charleston, South Carolina, was heavy with humidity and secrets. Maria Alvarez Hartford stood on the cracked stone steps of the Hartford family estate, a sprawling 100-year-old mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. From the outside, it was all white pillars and manicured hedges, hearkening back to a southern grandeur that had long since rotted from within. Inside, bitterness festered like mold. For Maria, this mansion was no home. It was a battlefield dressed in chandeliers and silk curtains. Her husband, Richard Hartford, descended from a line of wealthy landowners who had once monopolized lumber across the Carolinas. Though the Hartford legacy had diminished over the years, their fortune was still substantial, tied up in properties, estates, and offshore accounts. To outsiders, they were an emblem of wealth and respectability. Within the family, however, tradition was cruelty, and cruelty was inheritance. Maria, the daughter of Mexican immigrants, had never been accepted into the Hartford clan. She was the outsider, whispered about in country clubs, mocked for her accent when she first came to America at 19, and dismissed for her unpolished manner. She had been tolerated when Richard married her, but never truly embraced. Now, with Richard gone, killed suddenly in a boating accident 2 months earlier, Maria found herself standing alone before the vulture-like stares of her in-laws. At her side, her 2 daughters, Sophia 17 and Isabel 14, shifted nervously. They watched her mother's shoulders tense as Richard's older brother, Charles, Hartford emerged from the study with legal documents in hand. "The family estate is not yours," Charles announced coolly, his voice carrying an authority that had always kept the others obedient. His silver hair gleamed under the varnished ceiling lights. "Nor are the properties or the business stakes. All of it belongs to the Hartford name. You are merely a guest here until further notice." Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. "Richard left everything to his daughters, not to you." Laughter rippled through the gathered relatives. Richard's sisters, their husbands, their spoiled children. "Don't be naive," sneered Annette, Richard's cousin. "Do you think you, of all people, could outwit this family? The will is for us to interpret. You can leave quietly now, and perhaps we'll consider allowing your girls a monthly stipend. Otherwise—" "Otherwise?" asked Maria, her voice trembling but defiant. Charles smirked. "Otherwise, we remind you of your place. You don't belong to this family. You never did." Something inside Maria cracked, but did not shatter. For the first time in years, she looked at them not as oppressors or tormentors, but as adversaries. These people had stolen her dignity piece by piece in life. Now they tried to erase her entirely in death. Not anymore, she thought. She turned, gathering Sophia and Isabel close. "We'll leave tonight," Maria said simply. Her daughters looked at her with fear. "But Mama—" "Listen to me," Maria said softly, her eyes burning with quiet determination. "They've declared war, and we will fight not with their cruelty, but with truth and law. This is not the end of us. It is only the beginning." As she led her daughters out into the warm Charleston night, the Hartford gates closing behind them like a prison they were finally free of, Maria knew this would not be easy. She also knew something that the Hartfords had forgotten. The strength of a woman wronged was far more dangerous than the greed of a family spoiled. What none of them realized yet was that Maria had more than resilience on her side. She had secrets buried in the Hartford empire. Secrets her husband had begun to uncover before his death. And against those secrets, the Hartford family name might finally collapse. The rented apartment on the edge of Charleston was small, with peeling paint and a view of the highway. But it was quiet, and more importantly, it was theirs. For the first time in weeks, Maria had a place where her daughters could sleep without fear of insults hurled across lavish dining halls. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, reading through her father's old files, her dark brows furrowed in concentration. "Mama," Sophia said cautiously, "I think Dad was investigating Uncle Charles before he died." Maria looked up from the stack of papers she had spread across the counter. Legal contracts, bank statements, and crumpled envelopes were all scattered in disarray. Richard had been secretive in the months before his death, spending long hours in his study, ignoring family dinners. Maria had assumed it was grief from watching her family tear each other apart. Now she saw it differently.
"How do you mean?" Sophia pushed a ledger toward her. "Look, offshore accounts, money going missing from the company's trust. Dad made notes. He thought Charles was laundering Hartford funds." Maria skimmed the pages, her anger sharpening into clarity. If Richard had discovered embezzlement within his own family, it explained more than she'd ever realized. Perhaps his death hadn't been an accident at all. "Isabel," Maria called. Her younger daughter appeared from the bedroom, clutching her sketchbook. She looked skeptical when Maria explained what Sophia had found. "So, Dad was onto them?" Isabel said quietly. "And then he just fell into the ocean?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The conclusion hung unspoken between them. Maria's jaw tightened. If the law won't protect us, then the truth will. We'll expose everything, starting with his will. And then, if God is kind, we uncover the rest. That night, Maria made her first phone call to a lawyer. Benjamin Carter was not the kind of lawyer the Hartford family would choose for their pristine corporate empire. He was younger than most, wore wrinkled suits, and kept his modest firm in an old brick building downtown. But what he lacked in polish, he made up for in grit, and a reputation for dismantling wealthy frauds who thought themselves untouchable. Maria met him the next morning, files clutched to her chest. "You understand what you're up against," Carter said, after hearing her story. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "The Hartfords are old money. Judges golf with them, juries envy them. They'll throw everything at you. And that's before we even discuss whether your husband's death was, as it seems. I don't want their approval," Maria said firmly. "I want justice, for my daughters, for Richard, and for myself." Carter watched her silently for a beat, then smiled. "Then let's start the war." The Hartford family was served within 2 weeks. The legal notice challenged the validity of Charles Hartford's claim of inheritance and demanded a full reading of Richard's will. The response was immediate and vicious. Maria began receiving anonymous threats. Letters slipped under the apartment door. Phone calls in the night, even an incident where Sophia caught a shadow lingering by her school gates before vanishing into the crowd. "You expected this," Carter told her calmly when she brought him the evidence. "They are bullies, Mrs. Hartford, and like all bullies, they escalate when threatened. That means we're making progress." Meanwhile, Charles Hartford prowled within the mansion, livid at this insult. His sister Annette urged him to crush Maria quickly. His cousins sneered over cocktails, mocking the very idea of an outsider bringing them to court. But Charles wasn't laughing. "She's not like before," he muttered, staring at the Charleston skyline through tall windows. "She's timid. She's bold now. Bold means dangerous, and dangerous means she gets destroyed before she destroys us." What neither the Hartford family nor even Benjamin Carter knew just yet was that Maria's quiet fury was fed by more than legal papers. In Richard's files was something far more devastating, a pattern of land deals tied to Hartford properties, concealing decades of fraud. Property documents signed off under false names, estates claimed through intimidation, poor families driven out of Charleston neighborhoods. The Hartford fortune wasn't just old money, it was stolen money. And for every page Maria read, her anger turned sharper, more deliberate. "Let them think this is only about inheritance," she whispered to herself one late night, staring at the ledger. "By the time I'm finished, it will be about everything." The first hearing was set for a humid Monday morning in the Charleston County Courthouse. The city outside buzzed like ordinary life, but for Maria Alvarez Hartford, it felt as if a storm hovered directly about her head. She wore a navy blue suit borrowed from a neighbor, her dark hair braided tightly so her nerves wouldn't betray her. Sophia and Isabel walked beside her, Sophia clutching her notes like a shield, Isabel holding her sketchbook like armor. Inside the courthouse, the Hartfords arrived like royalty. Charles led the procession, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his steps slow, deliberate, designed to intimidate. Annette followed, dressed in sharp emerald silk, her lips curled into a mocking smile. The cousins trailed behind, whispering loudly enough to be overheard. Look at her clothes. Pathetic. She's fishing for sympathy. She doesn't stand a chance. Maria kept her chin high. Let them stare. Let them laugh. Judge Carrington, a stern man who had likely played golf with half the Hartford lineage, presided. Still, his reputation for fairness gave Maria hope. Benjamin Carter rose first. Your Honor, we seek a formal reading of Richard Hartford's will, witnessed and notarized, which has mysteriously been excluded from probate by members of the Hartford family. My client and her daughters are not guests in this inheritance. They are central to it. Charles's attorney, Douglas Pierce, a man with a slick grin and polished cufflinks, countered smoothly. Your Honor, my clients, Richard Hartford's true family, intend to demonstrate that Maria Alvarez manipulated Richard in his final years. We all know the story. A woman who married into wealth, never truly belonging, and now seeks to strip a century-old legacy built by the Hartfords.
The words cut like knives, but Maria never flinched. She knew that Charles and his allies would drag her name through the mud, but she also knew the truth would outlast their venom. Judge Carrington leaned forward. We will allow the will to be examined in the next session, but let me be clear, this court will tolerate no intimidation. The law decides inheritance, not family politics. It was a small victory, but a start. Maria exhaled slowly. Charles's glare from across the courtroom said everything. This was only the beginning. That evening, inside the Hartford estate, Charles convened his own quiet war council in the study. Whiskey glasses clinked as Annette, Pierce, and Charles's son Jonathan leaned over the mahogany table. She's got Carter, Jonathan muttered, slamming down a newspaper article about the lawyer's past victories. The man's a parasite, feeding off rich families. If he digs too deep, we're exposed. We bribe him, Annette said briskly. Everyone has a price. Charles shook his head. Not Carter. He's made a career of refusing dirty money, just so he can boast about his purity. No, we find another way to break them. Something personal. Something that makes Maria too scared to keep fighting. Pierce smirked, twirling his pen. Leave that to me, Charles. Reputation is fragile. If we can paint her as unstable, unfit to manage property, or even to raise heirs, then she'll have no standing. Custody battles, character assassinations, whispers that she drove Richard to despair. Truth matters less than perception. A cruel smile spread around the room as the plan took shape. Meanwhile, back in the cramped apartment, Maria sat awake long past midnight. Sophia was outlining legal strategies with Carter's notes, Isabel sketching absent-mindedly by the lamp. Do you think we'll lose? Isabel asked suddenly, her voice trembling. Maria closed her eyes, listening to the faint hum of cars outside, the sound of ordinary people whose lives were not consumed by greed and vendetta. But then Sophia placed her hand atop Maria's, steady and sure. Mama, Dad believed in justice. And you always told us, dignity is not given. It's taken back. Maria looked at her daughters, her strength, her reason, her army. Their eyes shone with the same fire Richard once had when he stood up to his brother. No, Maria said firmly, the doubt hardening into resolve. We don't lose. Not this time. The next morning, Maria discovered something chilling. Taped to their apartment door was a photograph, grainy, black and white, showing Isabel walking home alone. Across it, scratched in red ink, were the words. Maria's hands trembled as she clutched the photo. Her first instinct was to shield her daughters, keep them safe, abandon the fight. But then she remembered Charles's cold smirk, Annette's mocking laugh, the arrogance of people who thought fear was power. Maria closed her eyes and steadied herself. Fear was their weapon. Truth would be hers. "This only proves they're desperate," she told Carter grimly when she delivered the photo to him. Carter studied it, his jaw tightening. "Then we hit back harder. If they want war, we give them a war." The day of the formal will examination arrived under a sky-threatening rain. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters for the first time since the litigation had begun. It was no longer a private family matter. Now it was a spectacle, a Hartford scandal that the city craved. Maria walked through the entrance, flanked by Sophia and Isabel. Flashbulbs snapped in her eyes, questions were hurled like stones. "Mrs. Hartford, are you trying to steal the family fortune? Did Richard alter his will under coercion? Is it true you were cut out deliberately?" She kept silent, her hand gripping Isabel's shoulder tightly, eyes forward. Carter murmured reassurances as they passed through the metal detectors. Inside, the air was thick with hostility. Charles smirked from across the aisle, Annette sat poised like a queen, and their attorney Pierce arranged his documents with smug precision. Judge Carrington called for order and directed the bailiff to bring forward the sealed envelope that contained Richard Hartford's last will and testament. The room silenced, anticipation heavy. The clerk began reading aloud. "I, Richard Edward Hartford, being of sound mind and body, do declare this to be my last will. To my wife, Maria Alvarez Hartford, I leave stewardship of my estate until such a time as our daughters, Sophia and Isabel, reach legal adulthood. Upon that time, equal inheritance rights pass to them." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Annette muttered under her breath, her smugness cracking. Charles's jaw clenched visibly. The document continued. "It is my wish that Hartford family properties be preserved not as tools of power, but as legacies for education, community, and family integrity. Should any party contest this with malicious interference, it is my desire their claim be nullified." When the reading ended, silence reigned. Then Pierce erupted. "Your Honor, my clients contend this will is fabricated, under manipulation. Richard Hartford would never entrust his fortune to an outsider, his foreign wife, over his blood." The words struck like venom, but Maria held her head high. Benjamin Carter stood swiftly. "Your Honor, every element of this will has been confirmed by signature, witness, and notary. My client's late husband was of sound mind, and the entire document reflects his intent with striking clarity. The Hartford family may not like his devotion to his wife and daughters, but dislike is not legal grounds for fraud." "Forgery," Pierce spat. "We demand handwriting analysis. We demand a psychiatric review of Richard's condition. He was under stress, manipulated, an attack on the family legacy." Judge Carrington banged his gavel. "Enough. This will stands as legal unless compelling contrary evidence is provided. Further hearing will determine the legitimacy of these objections." It was another step in Maria's favor, yet she knew the real war had only begun. After the session, Carter handed Maria an envelope the clerk had passed along. "This was attached inside Richard's file," he said quietly. Alone with Sophia and Isabel, Maria opened it. Her heart plummeted as she read her husband's unmistakable handwriting. "Maria, if you are reading this, it means I could not finish what I began. Charles has been stealing from the family trust for years. I found documents tying millions to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Be careful whom you tell. If they sense what I know, they may go further than threats. Protect the girls and finish what I started. With love, R." Maria stared at the words until her hands trembled. Tears blurred her vision, not of grief, but fury. Now she knew Richard's death had not been chance. Sophia's voice broke the silence. Mama, this means Uncle Charles killed him, doesn't it? Maria folded the letter carefully. She said firmly, "It means we hold the weapon he feared the most, truth." Meanwhile, at the Hartford estate, chaos simmered. Charles stormed into the study, slamming a crystal decanter against the wall. "That will was supposed to be gone. He promised me. He swore Maria would never touch a dime." Annette grabbed his arm. "Then we bury them another way. If Richard left more than a will, papers, letters, evidence, we must find them and erase them. If Maria thinks she's clever, then we'll remind her what happens to anyone who crosses this family." Charles stood stiffly, his breathing ragged, but his mind already calculating. If Maria had Richard's files, it wasn't just property at stake. It was his empire, his freedom. "She wants war," Charles snarled. "Then we'll burn her world to ashes." It began with whispers. At Sophia's high school, parents suddenly spoke in hushed tones in the carpool lane. Neighbors in their apartment complex started avoiding eye contact. Even Isabel's art teacher pulled Maria aside awkwardly. "Mrs. Hartford, there are stories circulating about your husband and you." Maria soon saw why. The Charleston Gazette's headline blared across its Sunday edition. "Gold Digger Widow Manipulates Hartford Legacy. Sources claim Maria Hartford pressured late husband." The article quoted anonymous family insiders describing Maria as unstable, controlling, even abusive. A narrative unfolded, carefully crafted, that Richard's death had been a desperate attempt to escape an overbearing foreign wife, that the will was forged under duress, that Maria was unfit as a mother, incapable of raising heirs worthy of the Hartford name. Every lie made her blood boil. TV anchors debated her real motives. Radio hosts sneered about opportunism. Social media bristled with comments. "She doesn't look like a Hartford. She's after the money, plain and simple. Marrying rich, killing richer." The smear campaign was swift, ruthless, and effective. Soon, even Judge Carrington seemed sharper in tone at hearings, as if public perception were beginning to cloud judicial neutrality. Riding high on the chaos, Charles Hartford appeared publicly for the first time. At a charity gala, covered by local news, he put on his most polished smile. "My brother was a kind man," Charles told reporters solemnly, hand pressed theatrically to his chest. "But he was also vulnerable to manipulation. Maria, she never fit in with our values. All we want is to honor Richard by protecting what's his." It was a masterstroke of performance, appealing to tradition, dignity, and the city's classist undercurrents. By the end of the evening, headlines labeled him a grieving brother defending heritage against an interloper. But Maria had weathered humiliation before. This time, she refused to bow. She gathered Sophia and Isabel close at the kitchen table that night. "Everything they're saying is poison, lies, and people will believe them because lies are easier than truth. But listen to me. We fight anyway. The will makes us rightful heirs, and your father's papers expose their corruption. That is our sword." Sophia clenched her fists. "Then let's strike back, Mama. If they want the public, let's give them the truth." Maria hesitated. The truth was dangerous. Richard's letter had warned her of that. But Carter agreed. "Sometimes the best defense is a counter-narrative," he told them. "We drip-feed the press evidence, financial anomalies, corrupt deals. Not all at once, but just enough to make the city doubt Charles's halo. Once the smell of scandal attaches to him, no charity gala can wash it off." Their first leak was small, but calculated. A local journalist friendly to Carter received evidence of a curious land grab connected to Charles Hartford. An old Charleston neighborhood, bought for pennies on the dollar, transformed into luxury condos while the original families were forced out. The article dropped midweek. Hartford property deals under scrutiny. Allegations of coercion surface. Though Charles dismissed it as slander from a bitter widow, the public buzz shifted. Rumors now swirled not only about Maria, but about him. And with rumors, cracks began to form. For the first time, Maria saw Charles's smile falter on camera. At the Hartford estate, anger simmered. You promised the smear alone would bury her. Instead, she's turning us into villains. Charles slammed his fist on the table. Because she's using Richard's files. He must have told her something before he died. Which means if we don't stop her digging, it's not only the estate, it's our legacy, our name, our freedom. His son Jonathan leaned forward darkly. Then maybe we handle it like we should have months ago. The meaning was clear. Eliminating Maria might become more than metaphorical. Maria sensed it too. Walking home from court one evening, she noticed a black sedan following just far enough behind. When Carter suggested increasing security, she refused. If I run, they win. I won't show fear. But later that night, as she tucked Isabel into bed, she felt the weight of Richard's letter pressing against her chest like a warning. She was balancing on a knife's edge. One misstep, and her daughters could pay the price. She whispered to the night, a vow more than a prayer. You took Richard. You won't take us. Not now, not ever. The office smelled faintly of dust and old leather. Benjamin Carter leaned over the table while Sophia spread Richard's ledgers one by one. The dim desk lamp flickered, illuminating scribbled phrases Richard had left in the margins, names, numbers, and cryptic warnings. Maria sat silently, her hands clenched in her lap. For weeks now, she'd lived in survival mode. Court by day, fear by night. But this evidence gave her something more, direction. Look here, Sophia said, circling a note. Richard wrote, Key, Port Charles, Marina, locker number 17. That's where his boat was docked the day he died. Benjamin frowned. If he hid something there, it could explain everything, from the embezzlement to his death. But we'll have to move carefully. If Charles or his people catch wind, they'll burn it before we get close. Maria leaned forward. Then we go quietly, tonight, no delays. Whatever Richard left, it's the weapon we need. The night air was thick with salt as they approached Port Charles Marina. Boats rocked gently under the moonlight, their reflections shimmering on the black water. Sophia and Isabel stayed in the car, while Maria and Carter made their way down the wooden pier. Maria's stomach twisted. Her husband's death was less accident, more design. But before relief could set in, Carter froze. Across the marina, shadowy figures were approaching. Run, he hissed. They bolted down the pier as two men in dark coats closed in. Maria's heels pounded the wood, her breath sharp and ragged. Over here. Carter pulled her toward a side gate. They barely slipped through before the men reached the pier, shouts echoing after them. By the time they reached the car, Maria's daughters were wide-eyed with fear. Sophia clutched Isabel's hand as Carter threw the briefcase into the trunk. They know, Maria whispered. Charles knows we've found something. The documents revealed more than they dared hope. Richard had traced thousands of dollars siphoned from the Hartford Trust into Charles's accounts, disguised under dummy businesses. Even more telling were emails between Charles and Pierce, hinting at removing an obstacle weeks before the boating accident. Benjamin Carter's eyes hardened as he read, These aren't just tax crimes. This is conspiracy, possibly even murder. Maria's voice trembled, but her resolve did not. Then we take this to the court, no matter what it costs. Meanwhile, at the Hartford estate, Charles sat in his study when one of his men reported the failed interception at the marina. They retrieved the box, the man admitted. Charles's glass shattered in his fist. Do you idiots understand what that means? If she shows those documents in court, I won't just lose the estate, I'll lose everything. Annette leaned forward, her eyes sharp with malice. Then end this the way it should have been ended. Maria, Carter, even those girls. Wipe them from the board before the hearing. There was silence. Then Charles gave a slow, deliberate nod. That night, Maria stood at her daughter's bedroom door and watched them sleep. Sophia curled under her blanket, Isabel sprawled with her sketchbook still open on the pillow. For the first time, Maria admitted, To herself, if not aloud, that she was terrified. The Hartfords had money, influence, power, and ruthlessness that knew no bounds. All she had was evidence, an untested lawyer, and her daughters. But then she remembered Richard's words, his trust, his warning, his final plea. Maria whispered to the dark, "They took your life, Richard. They won't take our future." When she closed her eyes, her fear turned into something else. Fire. The apartment was eerily quiet that Thursday evening. Maria had just tucked Isabel in and was making tea when the faint flickering of the hallway light caught her attention. A shadow lingered outside the door. Still, silent, watching. Her pulse quickened. She moved to the pee-hole. Nothing. Just darkness. She turned away, and the glass window in the kitchen shattered with a deafening crack. "Down!" she screamed, pulling Sophia to the floor as a brick skidded across the tiles. Pinned to it was a note scrawled in angry red. "No court, no evidence, next time it's blood." For the first time, Maria felt real terror crawl under her skin. This wasn't threats in ink or whispers in the press. This was escalation. Benjamin Carter arrived within an hour as he inspected the glass shards. "They're done playing games," he said grimly. "First intimidation, now assault. The next step is worse. Maria, you need protection. Police, security, something." But Maria shook her head. The police gulf with Charles. They'll call it vandalism, nothing more. Carter sighed, knowing she was right. "Then we expose them faster. The court date can't wait. If we reveal the documents in discovery, they'll know the walls are closing in. Desperate men make mistakes, and maybe that's when we nail them." 2 nights later, Maria was driving home from Carter's office with Isabel in the passenger seat. A black SUV swerved into her lane on the narrow bridge, forcing her toward the guardrail. "Hold on," she cried, wrenching the wheel. Horns blared, tires screeched, and miracles held. She managed to skid to a halt just before crashing into the bay. The SUV sped off. Isabel clung to her, sobbing. For Maria, something inside shifted permanently. Fear gave way to fury. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was survival. "They want me dead," she whispered into the darkness, eyes blazing. "Then let them come for me in the light of the court. I'll strike them there, where the whole city is watching." At the Hartford estate, Charles listened to his driver explain how the accident on the bridge had failed, his face flushed with rage. "Can no one do a simple job?" he hissed. Annette poured herself a drink, unconcerned. "Careful, Charles. Sloppy moves only attract suspicion. If you keep fumbling, even the judge will raise eyebrows. Better to bury her in court, with credibility, with character assassination, than roadside theatrics." But Charles knew the truth. Maria was no longer a nuisance. She was a threat. If her documents reached Judge Carrington's bench, she could end him. And unlike the others in his family, Charles had no illusions left. It was kill or be killed, in business, in family, in legacy. On the eve of the next hearing, Maria sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Richard's last letter. Sophia slept in the next room, Isabel curled by the window. The memory of the bridge still haunted her, the screech of tires, the cold taste of mortality. And yet, despite her exhaustion, she felt stronger than ever. Richard's death had nearly drowned her in despair. But now, standing against Charles' attacks, she understood something deeper. Every brick thrown, every insult whispered, every threat delivered only made her resolve harder. "They wanted me broken," she whispered into the empty night. "Instead, they built me into their ruin." The courtroom was overflowing. Reporters lined the benches. Cameras flashed outside, and Charleston buzzed with anticipation. Everyone wanted to see the outsider widow and the old money Hartfords clash in what had become more than an inheritance battle. It was a trial of legacy, truth, and blood. Maria walked in with Sophia and Isabel at her side. She was tired, bruised by weeks of fear and humiliation, but her chin was unbowed. Behind her, Benjamin Carter carried the battered leather briefcase containing the box from the marina, the Hartford's true undoing. Across the aisle, Charles Hartford sat rigid, his face a mask of calm fury. Annette's lips curved into a brittle smile, but her eyes flickered with unease. They looked powerful as always, but Maria saw the cracks. Judge Carrington began. "We are here to determine the rightful heirs to the Hartford estate and the validity of this will. Counsel, proceed." Pierce rose first, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your Honor, we maintain that my clients, Charles Hartford and his kin, are the rightful custodians of the family's estate. Mrs. Maria Hartford manipulated Richard in his final days, producing a fabricated will. She is unstable, she is dangerous, and she is unfit to carry the Hartford name." Whispers coursed through the gallery like a tide. Then Carter stood. "With respect, Your Honor, the only danger here lies in the Hartford family itself. We have evidence, documents, contracts, financial records, that prove not only that Richard's will is authentic, but that Charles Hartford stole millions from his own family trust. And worse, we will show this court that Richard Hartford's death was no accident." A gasp electrified the room. Charles's knuckles whitened against the table, but he remained silent. Carter approached the bench, unlocking the briefcase. "Your Honor, these papers were secured by Richard Hartford himself at Port Charles. They show wire transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, all tied to Charles Hartford. Notice the dates of these transfers, weeks before Richard's death." He flipped another document onto the stand. And here, an email from Charles to his attorney Douglas Pierce. Quote, "Richard is becoming a problem. If we don't deal with him soon, everything unravels." Annette leapt to her feet. "Forgery! Lies!" But Carter's voice thundered. The emails were verified by digital forensics. The bank statements corroborated. "Your Honor, this is not only theft, but conspiracy to silence Richard before he could expose them." Judge Carrington scanned the papers, his expression grim. "Mr. Hartford, do you deny these signatures, these transfers?" Charles said nothing, his jaw stone. Maria rose slowly, every eye in the courtroom upon her. She said, her voice steady, resonant, "For years, I was mocked, dismissed, and called an outsider. They said I didn't belong. But Richard believed in me, and he trusted me with the truth. These people," she gestured toward the Hartford row, "wanted to erase me, erase my daughters, erase their own brother's will because greed meant more to them than family. They didn't just insult us, they killed him for it." The silence that followed was thunderous. Reporters scribbled furiously. Camera shutters clicked like gunfire. For the first time, Charles Hartford looked shaken. His mask cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Judge Carrington's gavel slammed. "This court will recess. Security. Confiscate all materials for review. No one leaves with these documents until examined." But the damage was done. The Hartford image, untouchable, pristine, immortal, was shattered. That evening, headlines swept across Charleston. Hartford heir accused of embezzlement, murder plot. Widow Maria Hartford emerges as central heir. The estate gates became a prison of reporters. Former allies withdrew. Charity boards severed ties. Business partners froze accounts. Charles raged in his study, but his empire was dust in his hands. Annette abandoned him, his son cursed him, and whispers of indictment for murder swirled in every corridor of Charleston society. Weeks later, Maria walked the halls of the Hartford estate, not as an exile, but as its steward. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming the portraits that once glared down at her. Isabel darted through the garden, sketchbook in hand. Sophia stood tall, clutching the first scholarship check funded by the Hartford trust Richard had preserved for his daughter's education. Maria paused in the main hall, staring up at Richard's painting. Her eyes softened. "We did it," she whispered. "They couldn't erase us." She had not sought revenge for pleasure. She had fought for survival, for truth, for the dignity no one could deny her again. The Hartford family's arrogance had collapsed under its own corruption, and in its ruins, Maria Alvarez Hartford had reclaimed not just an estate, but her name, her honor, and her daughter's future.